Space conjures up images of endless planets, untapped resources, unrealized economic opportunity, and adventure. But for an ardent conservationist, space also spawns other images, other thoughts. Planet Earth is roughly 510 million kilometers squared. It was formed about 4 billion years ago. But interestingly, mankind had very little impact on this planet until about 8,000 years ago with the widespread adoption of agriculture. As this animation shows, our impact on this space was very slight at first, very little indeed. But then it became exponential. In fact, our impact has only really been large over the last 200 years. 200 years ago, there were less than 1 billion people living on planet Earth. By the 1900s, it was 1.5 billion people. By 2000, 6.5 billion people lived in our space on planet Earth. Now, there are over 7 billion of us, and this trend is set to continue. Today, over 353,000 babies will have been born. In fact, from the time that I started speaking tonight till the time that I end, 3,600 new infants will be added to the world's population. By 2030, Asia will add 600 million people to its population. Africa will add 500 million people. By 2050, the population of Africa will double from 1.2 billion to 2.4 billion people. And the populace is becoming increasingly urban. Now 54% of us live in urban centers. We can expect that trend to continue. By the end of this decade, it'll be 66%. And urbanization should be a good thing, given the fact that we've seen so much of our space is now occupied. Over 50% of our space, in fact, is occupied. So high-density housing should be applauded. But unfortunately, where there's urbanization and an increase in wealth, what closely follows is urban sprawl. As people get richer, they move out to the suburbs. They buy bigger houses, which are connected to the city by roads, which in turn use more space. This is also set to continue. And as populations become more urban, they also become wealthier. Currently, there are 3 billion middle class on Earth. It's expected to grow to 5 billion by 2030. And that increasing population increases the demands for raw materials, for resources, for food. And what do we do with all of that food? What do we do with all those resources that we have mined so carefully, that have occupied so much of our space? Well, we throw it away. 1.4 billion tons of waste are produced every year. Let's put that into perspective that we can understand. Every single individual in the US is responsible for 2.2 kilograms of waste per day. In the UAE, it's 1.65 kilograms of waste per day. It's a phenomenal amount. And as the population grows and becomes wealthier, so does our demand for high-protein foods, for meat and for fish, which in turn also occupy huge amounts of space. Much of that rubbish, much of that waste is housed in illegal dump sites. In fact, the waste of 4 billion people around the world is housed in unsanitary, illegal dump sites. We too have illegal dump sites in the UAE. This is a map of them in Abu Dhabi. There are tens of thousands of them. And dump sites also have an impact, societal, health, and economic impact. And if we consider our food production, 30% of our space that we have reserved for agriculture is wasted because the food that it produces never ends up on our tables. We simply throw it away. So for mankind, the prognosis doesn't look very good when you consider our space. For the animal kingdom, I'm afraid the problem is that much worse. We can no longer rely on the planet that has been pretty much unchanged for 11,700 years for our species because it is changing so fast. Scientists for decades have been warning that we are heading towards the 6th mass extinction. Geologists tell us that the last 5 mass extinctions, the last of which was 443 million years ago, were all as a result of natural activities. Volcanoes erupting, tectonic plate shifts, meteor strikes, etc. But this one's different. This new era is called the Anthropocene, an era when mankind has a greater impact than nature on the stability of our planet. The Living Planet report supports this. Nearly 50% of our species have been lost, 58% of our species have been lost since 1970. The primary reason for this is habitat destruction or alteration. This affects every single ecosystem. Terrestrial ecosystems have lost 38% of their populations. Again, the causes are the same: habitat destruction and alteration. The other causes of this loss, invasive species, disease, illegal hunting, are also byproducts of our space invasion. Every ecosystem is affected, as I say. Nearly 50% of our forests had been lost by the year 2000. Tropical rainforests provide huge ecosystem services to us on planet Earth, the sequestration of carbon, etc. If we look at grasslands, nearly 50% of them have been converted for human use. And if we look at individual species, such as this African lion that I saw in the Masai Mara, between 1983 and 2013, 90% of this species have been lost. I'm afraid freshwater species fare even worse. 81% of their populations have been lost. Over half of the rivers on our planet have had their flow altered or their course changed by human activity. And the same can be said for any species, any ecosystem. They are all affected. Not surprisingly, with oceans occupying 70% of our space, ocean environments, marine species are also affected. Corals occupy just 0.1% of the ocean floor, and yet they support 25% of all marine species. 75% of all corals in the world today are severely threatened or critically endangered. This simply cannot go on. We simply cannot let this continue. We have to realize the impact of the devastation of these ecosystems on us, our well-being, and the well-being of our planet. Tropical rainforests play a critical role in our weather patterns. Do you know there are now 50 countries that are suffering from a critical water shortage? They are all countries that didn't have a water shortage before. And if you want to see how real and immediate this problem is, talk to anybody from Cape Town. We simply have to find a better way. We have to find a way of uncoupling economic activity from environmental degradation. And it's not going to be easy. Consider this. What is the world's most used measure of a country's success? It's development. It's gross domestic product, isn't it? That single measure is a measure in monetary terms of how much stuff the country produces, how many goods and services they produce. There is, however, some good news on the horizon, I believe, something positive. The Sustainable Development Goals, created by the United Nations, have been universally adopted by almost every nation. These 17 goals and 169 targets should pave the way for a better relationship between our economy, our society, and our environment. But will they be enough for fragile planet Earth? I worry that we have 3 human traits that could derail the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. Firstly, as we've already seen, as a species, we are inherently greedy. The more wealth we have, the more stuff we demand. Secondly, we adopt a silver bullet mentality. We're always looking for the big solution tomorrow for today's problems. And thirdly, we have a tendency to overcomplicate things. As much as I applaud the Sustainable Development Goals, they're not entirely clear to many people, to governments, to businesses, to us as consumers. The interrelation between them, who does what, is not always clear. My rather simplistic view, and perhaps slightly provocative view, is that we need to look at the world's problems, and indeed the solutions on the table, through the lens of space. If we are to rigorously protect our natural areas, we should do so. Currently, only 15.4% of our planet is protected. It's slightly higher in Abu Dhabi, but that's it worldwide. It's simply not enough. We need more. We need to identify those areas of ecological significance, and we need to protect them vehemently. Again, through the lens of space, we need to take a very close look at our food production. How can it be that the Netherlands, that tiny wee country, is the second biggest exporter of food in the world? We need to rigorously, as companies, as individuals, look at the supply chain and eliminate harmful practices such as palm oil production, soy feed for cattle, which are having such a devastating effect on some of the world's most sensitive ecosystems. We need to protect wildlife areas. We need to find more of them, and where possible, we need to rewild them. We need to restore those habitats to what they used to be. I have been privileged enough, or fortunate enough, to work on one such program. The return of the extinct in the wild scimitar-horned oryx to Chad, its native land. This project was inspired by the legacy of the late Sheikh Zayed. It's been led by the Environment Agency Abu Dhabi, with its partners, the Chadian government, the Smithsonian Institution, the Sahara Conservation Fund, and the Zoological Society of London. We aim to restore 500 animals back to Chad. This magnificent creature fell prey to illegal hunting from the 1960s. It was declared extinct in the wild in the year 2000 by the IUCN. Sheikh Zayed had a number in a private collection which he handed over to the Environment Agency. They have supplemented that herd with animals from all over the world to get the perfect genetic combination to give it the best chance of survival in the wild. A breeding facility in Abu Dhabi has been breeding these animals for about 8 years, and this is them being released into a pre-release facility in Chad. I cannot tell you the impact that this is having on that 78,000 square kilometer region, the Wadi Rimeh Wadi Akim Game Reserve in Chad. This is a beacon of hope for conservationists. The image you see now is the first scimitar-horned oryx emerging from captivity into the wild and free. This initiative has also had a significant impact on the local population. The nomadic herders used to follow the scimitar-horned oryx because it's a great water diviner. This species can smell water, or rain, I should say, on the winds for over 100 kilometers. So these herders used to follow it. It led them to their source of water. Obviously, when it became extinct, they no longer had this natural compass. We now have over 100 of these animals, wild and free, in Chad, with a great deal more in a pre-release facility there, and more on their way. Their survival rates have been superb. Their birth rates have been superb. In fact, better than you would experience in most zoos around the world. I have to be honest, there have been moments of an emotional roller coaster, if you like, during this project. I remember receiving in my inbox one day an image of a day-old calf which had been savaged by a number of jackals. It was pretty upsetting. it brought a tear to the eye. But strangely, almost immediately afterwards, there was an immense feeling of elation among everybody in the team, because this was a vindication that this is a true back to the wild species reintroduction. No fences, no meddling, just wildlife the way it should be. Wild. Now I know that not everybody has the opportunity to experience something such as this firsthand, to see those herders, to see the environmental conscious community, the local people and the impact it's had on them. But ignorance is no longer an excuse. We all know the damage that we are doing to our planet. We are more connected than we have ever been. Every minute of every day, 250 hours of YouTube content are uploaded. If Facebook were a nation, it would be the most populous on earth with over 2 billion citizens. So we have to harness this opportunity for collective action among countries, governments, corporates, and individuals to make this change. We need to really rigorously look at ourselves and the space that we occupy, either directly or indirectly. We have to reject high space-consuming practices in our everyday lives. Think about what we eat. Think about what we waste. We need to look at planet Earth through the lens of space. Our space, our colonization of that space. And then we will have solutions which will make this planet a far better place for us and also for all of the species that we're privileged to share it with. Thank you.